minutes for legal purposes, and this is the only way to pick up audio. Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. The Historic Preservation Commission is a 9-member board appointed by the City Council and serves on a voluntary basis without compensation. The purposes of the commissions are to promote the educational, cultural, economic, and general welfare of the city through the preservation and protection of the buildings, sites, structures, areas, and districts of historic significance and interest through the preservation and enhancement of local historic, architectural, archaeological, and aesthetic heritage found in the city, through the maintenance of the distinctive character of the city's historic districts, and through the promotion and enhancement of the city's historic and aesthetic attractions to tourists and visitors. Our procedure for conducting business is for the petitioner for each item will be asked to come forward, state your name for the record, and present his or her request. The board would ask any questions the board may have. Once public testimony and discussion for a particular item has concluded, the members of the board will deliberate and will render its decision. Members with a personal or financial interest in any interest or any item are required to recuse themselves from voting. I would like to take this opportunity to ask each member of the Historic Commission to introduce him or herself, and I'll start this time from my right and the audience left.
Carol King.
Doug McCann.
Dallas Hanbury.
Cindy Keeping.
Brian Mann.
James Long.
And I'm Richard Baylor, the chairperson of the Historic Preservation Commission. And I would like to thank, as we normally do at our meetings when we begin, to thank Ms. Christy Anderson from the City Planning Control staff for taking the time out to come to our meetings, and Ms. Paula Richardson, also from the Planning Control staff, who routinely on Monday mornings call each member of this body to determine if that member plans to attend our meetings. And I would like to thank each one of our commissioners, other commissioners, for either routinely returning her calls or answering the phone when Paula Richardson gives you a call. A quorum of the Historic Preservation Commission consists of 5 members of the 9-member board. It takes 5 votes of the Historic Preservation members in attendance to take action on each item, either for approval or denial. Okay, and now we will begin our meeting. And first of all, I would like to again welcome Mr. Walter Bush, Senior, who's just come in. And would you like to introduce yourself? I just did, but if you just say it again.
Walter Bush.
Or speaking right directly through the mic.
Walter Bush.
Okay, all right. The chair will now entertain a motion for the adoption of the minutes of the last meeting.
So move.
Second.
Any unreadness? All those in favor, let it be known by a show of hands. Motion carried. Thank you so very much. And if we begin our meeting this afternoon, we have before us our petitioner, Ms. Naomi Slip. Is she here? Yes. Would you come to the podium, please? She's from Capitol Heights Historic District, and the location of the property, 2143 Madison Avenue, and she's asking for a historic plaque for that property. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hello, good afternoon.
Since you submitted your petition, is there anything else that you'd like to bring to our attention about this property?
I don't think so. I think the description and the photographs that were submitted adequately convey the history of the property. As far as we know, there have been no substantive changes to it since its construction in 1930.
Okay, please speak directly into that microphone.
Sure. As far as we know, there have been no substantive changes to it since it was constructed in 1930 for the exterior.
Okay. The members, do you have any questions, comments for Ms. Slip?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, she requested a district sign, but I think the property qualifies for, excuse me, historic building sign.
Okay.
It would appear she's asking for a historic building sign, but does not wish to name the house.
Yes.
And I wish to what'd you say? She's asking for a historic building sign, but not, well, she said historic plaque.
Yes.
That's a district sign.
Historic plat covers both signs. It's up to you all to determine if something qualifies for a historic building sign, which is one that has relatively few alterations, or a historic district sign, which means it's been altered, but it is part of a district and thereby and is at least 50 years old and thereby may qualify for a sign.
Oh, I apologize. I read down here in the comments that it said it would be a historic building sign.
It's all right. I got it.
Yeah. Now, in other words, what Chris is saying, we'll determine if it's a historic building or district sign that we award to the petition based on how much change have come from the exterior.
Well, Ms. Chairman, she said there had not been any
Yes.
As far as I know.
structural obvious material changes, so.
So she qualifies for historic building sign that there's
Yes,
been very few exterior changes.
Mr. Chairman, just one question.
Yes.
She's asking for a particular sign saying 1930, and it says in here that the record suggests a 1930 construction date. What do you mean, suggest? What are you saying?
That means I use the word suggest instead of the county tax records say the building date is 1930.
But there's
Word
something in-
choice.
And
they
that's
were paying
because that's the-
taxes in 1930? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry?
Were they paying taxes in 1930? Is that what you indicated?
That, I don't know. The county tax records, all the property tax records have a section on buildings on the property. And the county has given each building an estimated construction date, and some of them will have a date if there's been a significant alteration or addition to that building, and it shows up in parentheses after that date. 1930 is the date that the county thinks that this house was built.
In other words, to make a long story short, this is the earliest information we have for this particular site that we can speak of with any kind of certainty. That's what that boils down to.
Thank you.
But yes.
Also, Mr. Chairman, now that we speaking in generalities as opposed to facts, many houses here, even those in the 50s, it would say 1950s, as opposed to, say, March 25th, 1950. No one's absolutely sure.
Sure.
They didn't require that you make that specific, except for when the water was turned on. Mm-hmm. That's the only requirement.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, any questions, comments, or?
How long have you lived in the property?
We purchased it a little over a year ago.
It's a great house.
Other comments, questions? Miss Naomi Slip, 2143 Madison Avenue. There being no further questions or comments, first of all, let me just say to you, ma'am, how much we appreciate your coming before us. The fact that you've been there only a little over a year really speaks volume for your interest in this property, and we just want to underscore that point and encourage you to come back and just let us know how you're doing, or give us an update, if you will. But the point is, bottom line, we're really impressed with the fact that you have this kind of interest, this level of interest in your property. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
The chair will now entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend a historic district sign for this property.
I'll second.
At 2143 Madison Avenue.
Historic district sign?
Building sign, I'm sorry.
Building sign.
I'm sorry,
Okay, all right.
excuse me.
Yes. All right,
Second.
all right. Any unreadiness? Historic building sign, 2143 Madison Avenue. Historic building sign. Any unreadiness? All those in favor, let it be known by show of hands. Thank you very much. Motion carries. Ma'am, please come back.
Thank you. Thank you all.
That's in the audience.
I will order that tomorrow, so I'll let you know when it comes in.
All right. As we continue on our agenda this afternoon, we were scheduled to have Mr. Douglas Watson to stop by here, but we understand that at the last minute he was unable, or he is unable to come before us. For our April meeting, we will have a presentation by Ms. Carol King, 50 Years of Preservation in Montgomery, and we're looking forward to that presentation very much. And we'd like to encourage our audience to please tune in for that April meeting. We have with us another guest this afternoon, and we don't want to go too far without allowing that guest to just take the time and just tell us something about yourself. Are you here for Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Oh, you are? Okay. All right.
Wonderful.
Very good. And I know who you are, but I want you, and I'm serious, to let the people know exactly who you are. And if you miss anything, I'll fill in some gaps for you, because I really want everybody to know who you are coming from yourself. Thank you very much for.
Okay, first of
taking the
all,
time to fill
I
in.
want to apologize for being woefully unprepared for the scope of the presentation that was originally scheduled to be given by Douglas Watson, who was the director of the City of St. Jude's. My name is William Ford. Most people call me Bill, and I am the president of the St. Jude Alumni Association and a 12-year student at the City of St. Jude's Educational Institute, which was part of the City of St. Jude's. I really also want to apologize for being an artist with no visual aids, which is my father, who was an art teacher, used to chastise me whenever I didn't have a pencil. He thought that was a height of redundancy or ridiculousness for an artist not to have a pencil. And I'm sure he would say right now, boy, you trying to give a presentation and you don't have any visual aids and you're an artist, a visual artist, so I apologize for that too. But this was kind of put in my lap, dropped in my lap on Saturday. And the general consensus was that having me show up was better than having nobody show up. So I'm here. I have to confess that the scope or the focus of this presentation was unknown to me as well. And so that most of the stuff I have to say, it basically relates to St. Jude's Educational Institute, but now that I'm here and I see that that we're talking about the history of the city of Montgomery via its buildings and the preservation of those buildings, I can certainly attest to some of the features at City of St. Jude's. And so let me just kind of launch into some notes I took. As most of you probably know, the City of St. Jude's is located on Fairview Avenue, and it was originally a 56-acre site, and now that has been truncated to 36 acres. It was built on, which I always thought was so ironic, it was built on the former Dimmick plantation, on the grounds of what used to be the Dimmick plantation. And I thought that was really ironic and appropriate that Father Harold Purcell, a native of Pennsylvania, saw fit to build a facility that would house the first integrated medical facility in the Southeast on what used to be a plantation, and the first institute for the education of Negroes, as we were called in those days, Catholic institution in the state of Alabama. The church was established in 1938, and the school was originally in the basement of the church. There were 8 classrooms. Those classrooms still exist in the basement of the church. Now, prior to opening the school, Father Purcell had a medical facility on Holt Street that he operated for several years while he was having his church and his hospital and his educational facility erected. So the social center was built in 1939, and the school, separate from the one that was in the basement of the church, was established in 1947. And it opened with approximately 325 students.
Wow.
The gymnasium and the cafeteria were constructed in 1963. That just coincidentally happens to be when my matriculation was there, and I remember when we finally got a full-size cafeteria and a gymnasium, and we were pretty excited about that. At that time, I was 10 years old, and I think I was in the 5th grade, something like that. And as I stated, the hospital was established in 1951, and it operated through 1985. And the oldest children of Dr. Martin Luther King were born in the hospital. And it was the first hospital that actually had an integrated staff as well. One of the significant events in St. Jude's history was the Night of the Stars, as they call it, when the Selma to Montgomery March took place, and approximately 10,000 marchers camped out on the grounds of St. Jude's. And for entertainment that night, they had a bunch of luminaries, plethora of luminaries: Peter, Paul, and Mary, Joan Baez,
Belafonte?
Harry Belafonte, Harry Belafonte, quite a few. I think even Marlon Brando was there. My parents were kind of strict. They did not allow me to attend, but I kind of soaked in the ambiance. I remember the day the marchers came over the hill coming down Fairview, and we actually were in class, and they didn't let us out for school. The nuns didn't let us out. And I remember distinctly being in my in a science class, and the nuns instructed us not to look out the window. Keep your eyes forward and keep your mind on your lesson. But I managed to keep my head this way and my eyes were going that way. And I distinctly remember seeing Martin Luther King lead the marches. He was very distinctive. His head it looked like it was as big as the circle on the front of that edifice there. It was just incredible, and I'll never forget that day. But St. Jude's was more than a school for us. It was a way of life. In addition to a bit of the history of St. Jude's that extends beyond the actual school itself and the city of St. Jude's, was when Mobile Heights was being proposed. And the City Planning Commission had meetings, and it was vigorously opposed by the residents of Ridgecrest. They thought that it would bring down the value of the homes in Ridgecrest, and they also said that it would overload the water mains. They said that a lot of the officers and airmen from Maxwell Air Force Base and Gunner had wives who lived in Ridgecrest, and they would need special police protection when their husbands weren't there because of the proximity of this proposed neighborhood in Mobile Heights. And Father Harold Purcell, who was the founder of St. Jude's, went to the Planning Commission, and he stood up and gave them a piece of his mind and told them that all men were created equal, and that there was no threat to the residents of Ridgecrest by the proposed community in Mobile Heights. Ironically, I was born and raised in Mobile Heights. So all this kind of is a backdrop to my life. You know, Mobile Heights and St. Jude's were very important in my development. Just this past weekend, one of my longtime friends passed. He was a realtor. His name was Frank Taylor. His dad owned cleaners on the west side of Montgomery, and they had his funeral at St. Jude's. And everybody that got up and spoke, most of them were classmates from St. Jude's or some of his childhood friends from Mobile Heights. And they invoked both those names. They said Mobile Heights and St. Jude's. They almost went in tandem out of everybody's mouth. That was part of the village that raised all of us children. We were proud to be residents of Mobile Heights and students at St. Jude's. Now, when I started at St. Jude's, and it was funny, I didn't know Father Purcell was dead. because the nuns talked about him like he was still alive. He had passed before I got to school. He had already passed. I think he passed in 1957 or 56, and I started school in 1959. But they talked about him. His presence was so tangible and real on campus that only until I actually went out and saw his gravesite behind the church did I realize he was deceased, because they talked about him in the present tense. And the motto over the school that's over the doorway is "Not what you have, but you." And they drummed that into our heads. It was not important what material possessions you had, but it was the character that you had within that was important. And the interesting thing about that is something that resonates regardless of what your ethnicity is, what your sexual orientation is, whatever your religion is. It's the integrity that you have as a human being that makes you a worthwhile citizen of your community and of this country. And so we were, that kind of information and that kind of attitude was ingrained in us every day we spent at St. Jude's. Now, the architecture of St. Jude's is so unique. Some of my classmates who were in the church on Saturday hadn't been in there in a while, and they were all looking around saying, "I love this church." The stained glass windows are incredible. The marble that's on the floor is incredible. The structure itself is just awe-inspiring. And we were very proud of that church. We were proud of the school, and even the uniforms we had to wear. We took pride in those uniforms too. I remember wearing a maroon jersey and a black tie and those gray trousers. And the nuns told us we were special, and we bought it. We swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. But the City of St. Jude's and St. Jude's Educational Institute, I just wanted to read a list of some of the people who graduated from there. Thomasina Rogers McGill, who was appointed to the Federal Job Safety and Health Tribunal by President Bill Clinton, and she continued to hold that position under Presidents Bush and Obama. She's a graduate of Northwestern and Columbia School of Law. Michael German is the HUD field director for the state of Georgia, and he also held that position for the state of Alabama up until a couple of years ago. Jermichael Green, a St. Jude graduate, is a starting forward for the Memphis Grizzlies of the NBA, the National Basketball Association. We have Dr. Rashay Richardson, who's a professor of African American literature at Cornell University, and she's also a visual artist. Mayor Jerome Antone, the mayor of Georgiana, Alabama, is a St. Jude's graduate, as is the late Beverly Ross. I'm sure most of you remember Beverly Ross. She was a longtime member of the Montgomery School Board. And Ella Bell, who's a member of the state school board, is a St. Jude's graduate also. Cedric Bradford, a local businessman and State Farm agent, and a real raconteur and interesting character in the city. And Father Manuel Williams, who's the pastor out at Resurrection Church, is also a St. Jude's graduate. We're very proud of him. We have an annual grand reunion that we've been doing now for 17 years. And it started out in the school gym, and then it went to the Knights of Peter Claver Hall on Good Street until they destroyed that. And once the school was closed, we started having it off-site, and this past November, we had it at the Renaissance Hotel and Spa, and over 400 people attended. So we've come a long way. We honored a gentleman this past grand reunion by the name of Walter L. Bush. I think some of you may be familiar with him. I think his father sits on this commission. And Henry Pugh, at Soulater is also a St. Jude's graduate. So we feel like, we feel strongly that the city of St. Jude's is really an important edifice in the city of Montgomery. It's historic. I dare say the greatest night of entertainment in this city's history took place on the grounds of St. Jude's. There is a statue in the foyer of St. Jude's that was done by Richmond Barthé, who is a leading proponent of the Harlem Renaissance. He was the first person of color to have his works in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He was a sculptor, and he had a bronze sculpture in his studio, a bronze sculpture in his studio, and Father Purcell went in and saw it, and he told Richmond Barthé he would like to have that at St. Jude's. And Richmond Barthé told him if he paid to have it cast, that he would defer his artist fee. And so Father Purcell got some people together and they raised $1,000 to have that statue cast. It's larger than life. And in 1984, when this book was written, Build Me a City, to cast a 22-inch figure would cost $1,600. So you can imagine what it would cost to cast this statue now. It's incredible, and based on my knowledge of art, I think it's probably the most expensive piece of sculpture in the city of Montgomery to this day, and very few people know that. So between the historical significance of the site, the building, the artwork that's in the building and in the church, I think St. Jude's, the city of St. Jude's, is really a jewel when it comes to places to see and places of importance and historical significance in Montgomery.
Mr. Ford, before you take your seat and before certainly we ask the other members of the commission for questions, I'd like for you to take 2 minutes for our audience and for our commissioners here to give us a spiel on what you call the St. Jude legacy.
Wow, it's a big legacy to live up to. I have to admit, I think that everything that I have accomplished in my life was either something that was instilled in me by my parents. My parents were extraordinary human beings. Both of them were educators. In my career, I spent most of my career in broadcasting, but for a short while, I was a substitute teacher. And I remember the first day I came home, I looked at both my parents and said, "You both need to be canonized by the Pope," because they both did it for 30 and 40 years, and I was just astounded. So my parents were a big influence, but St. Jude's was a place that fostered. There was never any intimation or inference that we could not achieve at the highest levels. They prepared us for every contingency. I remember starting in high school, we had to learn 25 new vocabulary words every week and use them in a sentence. And even today, I sometimes use words and people look at me like, "Where'd you get that from?" Or you're trying to impress somebody. But no, it's just that we had to use them. I mean, words like osculate for kissing, as a young boy, that was one of my favorites. I used to use that one. That was part of my pickup line. "Would you like to go out behind the building and osculate?" So, but St. Jude's was incredible. It was a legacy, and to see people like Thomasina Rogers and Michael German. And one thing I left out was our incredible history when it came to sports in the state of Alabama. St. Jude's was, even though we were small, that was our sports motto, was small but mighty. Even though our enrollment was small, we competed at the highest levels of whatever classification we were in, up until winning back-to-back basketball championships the year they closed the school. And they had enough talent on that squad that year to be three-peats. They would have three-peated, I'm sure. But in my career, I I read off a list of people some of the people we honor every year at our grand reunion, and I still don't know how, to this day, the Alumni Association, I was the first person honored, and I still think it was a mass hallucination. But I always approached my job the way they told us at St. Jude's, the way they presented it to us at St. Jude's is like, whatever you do, do it to the best of your ability. So when I started at WSFA, I was a production technician. I started at WSFA part-time. I got a job because of two things. I took typing in high school because I didn't want to take algebra. And so I took typing. And so when I got the job at WSFA, I got the job because they said they needed somebody who could type and not make mistakes. And I was never a fast typer, but I never made mistakes because that was one thing they taught us at St. Jude's. Punctuation and correct spelling was important. And within less than, in 9 months, I was a stage manager. And then I moved from stage manager to art director, where I was art director for 21 years. And so my career is a direct result of what I learned at St. Jude's. It was all about excellence and do everything that you undertake to the best of your ability. So I still, a little part of me dies inside every time I pass by that school and I see it closed. And that's the dream of every St. Jude's graduate, is to see those doors reopen. So we have not given up hope, and hopefully in a not too distant future, we'll be able to see the doors reopen. But St. Jude's has meant a lot to me in my life, and it's a legacy and a standard that even to the day that they closed, they had students who were in the National Honor Society, were getting full scholarships to some of the best universities in the city and around the country. So it's a legacy that Father Purcell started, and it was a legacy that every St. Jude's graduate attempts to uphold. One other thing, for many years I always wondered how St. Jude's ended up with the nickname the Pirates for a Catholic school. That always seemed odd to me and incongruous until I was reading that Father Purcell, being a native of Pennsylvania, attended seminary in Pittsburgh, and his favorite baseball team was more than likely the Pittsburgh Pirates, which is why I think, I don't have any confirmation of that, but I can't think of any other reason why a Catholic school would have a pirate as its mascot. So thank you for listening to me ramble. And
Sure. You're just fine. We really appreciate that. And I will now open the floor for questions or comments from the other commissioners.
Mr. Ford, whom I already know and asked to volunteer for the awards program last year.
You did.
I, for one, certainly appreciate your being here, and I also share your feelings about the closing of St. Jude. It doesn't seem right, doesn't seem fair. In fact, it doesn't seem.
Right.
You know, when you pass by, that's St. Jude. So, and also we are grateful for your presence here. And as far as your success, we don't think that typing and the omission of algebra has anything to do with your successful tenure at WSFA. And also, we'd like to thank you for being an ambassador plenipotentiary. Of course, that goes with our portfolio. And we appreciate you being here, and it was very informative. Thank you so much for
thank
coming.
you, thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Another
thank you.
commissioner, any other comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Before you take your seat, I just want to emphasize the role of Harold Purcell.
Oh, yeah.
I have made it a point of showing a parallel between Harold Purcell and Booker T. Washington, persons who came from northern points to the south to make a difference. And it is really interesting and impressive that the personnel at St. Jude would speak of Father Purcell in the present tense. And the point is, we don't want to minimize at all the role of Father Purcell. Thank you very much.
Okay, and at some point, I'd like to come back with some visual aids and bells and whistles so I can wow you with the beauty of St. Jude.
We're here every second Tuesday at 5:30.
Okay? All right, I'm going to take you up on that. Thank you. All right.
And one closing comment, St. Jude is not only an icon in this community and state, but in this world, in this country. It'll always be St. Jude. It'll never die, because we'll never forget it.
Mr. Ford, would it be possible to have a field trip to go to St. Jude's? Is it
Oh,
possible?
absolutely, absolutely.
Who-
I
who-
can arrange that.
You can arrange that.
I can arrange that. I'll talk to Dr. Bailey and Doug, and we'll coordinate it and pull that together. It's
would be
definitely possible. If you've never seen it, you have to.
I've seen it, but I was at Catholic High, and
Yeah.
we went to visit every year.
Yeah, it's a must. It's a must. Thank you.
Thank you, too.
Thank you.
Okay. Proceeding with our agenda for this afternoon, working committee for our historic sign program, Cindy Keeping, Carol King, and Brian Mann, who will report in April at our meeting regarding our historic sign. And we need to appoint some personnel for our committees. At this point, I'd like to accept volunteers for our application review and selection committee. Is there anyone who would like to volunteer for that committee? Yes, one. Anyone else? Can we get, okay,
Yeah,
two
I'll be
people.
glad
Two
to.
people for that committee. All right.
I think
Our
Carol's on it by default because
How
it's
many?
her application, so 3. So Cindy, Dallas, and Carol.
All right, and then last year, we added some outsiders too,
Okay,
like,
excellent.
We should have
Mr.
roped him
Ford.
in before he left.
Yes.
Mr. Ford was on it, helped us last year, and we had some outside people too.
Sure, let's
Did some input.
let's draft him, and if he says no, we can always substitute. I don't think he will say no, but let's draft him.
He won't say no.
Yeah,
That doesn't make sense.
right. Okay, so we'll draft him for our application review and selection committee.
He has experience.
Go right ahead.
I just say he has experience from.
Yes, speak to the mic. Yes.
He has experience from
Yes.
the
Yes.
last
Yes.
year.
Thank you. PR, Media Invitations Committee, volunteers.
And this would be kind of coming up with a press release. The city communications office would distribute that to media outlets, but if anybody has contacts with WSFA or Carolyn Hutchison to do an In Focus segment, and I can't remember what we did for invitations last year. We did printed something and mailed them.
Right, we
We've
had
got a mailing list.
sort of the classic, right, the classic invitation, and then we did some E's too, a lot of E invitations.
Yeah, but we did physical
some-
invitations to like city council members, the mayor. I can't remember who all's on the list. We have a list. So you'd have to, if you like addressing envelopes and
We do that.
doing that sort of thing.
Because there's also there's some PR that's out there too. There's some stuff that's coming up in print that Mr. Waller's already gotten out too, so.
Yeah. He distributed the application for us.
Right. And then the Historic Neighborhood Coalition has distributed it down into the neighborhoods at this point too, but there's still lots of room, so if anybody needs an extra one, application, we've got some here for you today.
Okay. Volunteers, PR, Media Invitations Committee.
We reviewed them last year. We reviewed them last year, invitations and stuff.
I think I ended up sending most of that stuff out last year because our volunteer disappeared.
Volunteers.
We can do it.
Don't all jump at once.
Yeah, we'll do it.
I'll be glad to
Yeah.
help with them, writing out the invitations.
It's not
Yeah, we'll do
hard.
it. Yeah.
One, two,
Because Christie, took care of the printing and design and everything.
One more?
so-
One more?
Who was number 2?
I'll help you with that
Okay.
too, but you probably have a file, don't you?
I should.
Okay,
You could just
I'll
change
send
the
you what I
dates.
have.
okay. Can we get one more volunteer?
And
awards-
again, you can pull in
For the
outside people.
PR, Media, and
Right.
Invitations Committee?
Mr. Chairman, awards in May, right? And so
Yes,
all
sir.
this work is going to be in April?
Yes.
April the 6th is the deadline? Right. April the 6th is the deadline. So, but some of this can be happening beforehand.
Yes.
That's just when we'll have to
Invitations.
finalize them.
Can we get one more volunteer, PR, Media, Invitations Committee?
I'm holding out for the
Okay.
next one.
I tried
Okay, all right,
the time there.
all right. Very good. We have 3, and now the reception.
Oh, Dr. Bailey, let me ask Christy something real quick. Christy, what do you think, do you think there is an opportunity to have the mayor do a resolution declaring May Preservation Month?
Maybe. I'll have to ask.
Okay,
I asked Mac about that.
if there's like a resolution writer too, isn't there? Or someone who- Okay,
I don't know.
okay.
Okay,
Because that would be kind of cool.
Okay.
all right. Reception,
I'm more than willing to help out with that one.
all right. 1,
Mr. Chairman, what would that consist of?
food, we will work up a
Food,
menu and the
program,
display and all
And
of
I've
that.
got a template for the program we used, or the program we handed
You can add
out
me to that.
last year. And also coordinating with the awards committee to decide what the award is going to be. Last year, Dr. Bailey got plaques,
Right.
whether
Actually, I think
that's
we had an award.
appropriate again, or certificates. And we have a small budget. We can't spend a lot of money on food. We got a cake last year. I still have a lot of paper products left over that are in an HPC awards box in my cube, so we probably have about $100 to $150 we can spend on that sort of thing. So Carol and I made little finger sandwiches, and we had punch, and had a
Cake was
cake
nice.
with
The cake was a real hit.
with the city
City
logo
seal
on
on it.
it, and said Preservation Awards, or so nothing heavy. Just get them sugared up and
Reception.
Put me on the list.
so.
Okay.
Add me to it.
1 more, or 2 more volunteers, have 1.
No, you have
2?
Jim's going to coordinate.
Okay,
I would volunteer Mrs. Mann to help with that
All
too.
right.
I will volunteer
okay.
Mrs. Hanbury to volunteer with that.
thank you very much.
There we go.
All in the family.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
She don't raise the eyebrow when you come in.
You will notice an application at the end of the agenda for any other questions or information you might have, using that application to address those questions or concerns. And then item F, awards add-on for 2019. Question, do we need a preservation leadership class? What is your response to that?
Well, this is something that has come up on my list of things we could do for several years. Mobile has a 6-week program that they offer where for an hour to an hour and a half a week, they have what they call their preservation leadership class. And it consists of talking about architecture and architectural history, the historic neighborhoods, the rules and regulations, the laws that allow districts to be regulated. We talked about possibly doing how to do an architectural survey, how to read buildings and look for clues that indicate how buildings have been altered over time. They wrap up, they do a tour of a building that's under renovation. And then their last class, they meet and they have a picnic in Magnolia Cemetery. So, I mean, we could have a picnic up with Hank in the Oakwood Annex. And then roll that into the awards program next year and have a graduation as part of the program.
That would spur interest.
Excellent idea.
Yeah.
So backing it up 6 weeks, I looked at my calendar, it'd be an early April start
Start it,
because our meeting next year would be like May 14th. No, that's this year.
Okay.
Anyway,
May.
April 2nd was about 7 weeks before when our HPC meeting would be.
All right, response from the other commissioners.
I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, I think it's, and we've got somewhat of an existing format, so. We're not reinventing
So this
the
is a
wheel.
community program, or is this for us as commissioners?
Us.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
oh,
definitely.
no, well, I mean, you all could
both.
do it, but
Both.
this would be a community program.
Oh, definitely.
Where,
But I'm saying we could participate in it as well.
oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we need that.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
So there would probably be, and we've talked
I need
about
it.
partnering with landmarks. Not sure how that's working out yet. But it would be open to anyone. There might be a registration fee to help cover the cost of material production. We talked about possibly sending the information to, at least starting with the magnet high schools, and if a high school student wants to attend and has a letter of recommendation from a teacher, we'd waive the fee, you know, just to
Yeah.
get some younger folks involved. It would be after hours,
Early after hours.
it'd be after work, but, you know,
Because it'll be light at that point too.
It will.
If there's,
It'll
you know,
be
we
good.
need to do field trips or whatever, and we talked about bringing in outside people too, you know, from around the state that might contribute, be speakers or workshop leaders, something like that.
How would you
Yeah.
promote it?
I have no idea. We'd have
Well-
another committee. No,
Right.
I
Well, we have that, we have a coalition, the coalition list that goes out to all the neighborhoods.
Okay.
Contacts, we've got a fair amount of good
It's a good
contacts down
coalition.
into the.
and if we can plan far enough ahead, I know Carolyn Hutchison likes to plan 2 to 3 months ahead on her,
Yeah.
to schedule her in focus segments. She's been supportive of our oral history project. There might be opportunities to get on some of the noonday programs and just talk about it and what the program would be, and just put it out there and see what happens. So,
I think it's excellent.
So I think that's a good idea. I think we should start formulating.
well, we need to. I was doing a 3-hour continuing education class for realtors, and it was a condensed version of Mobile's program. So I've got a lot of the material for at least 3 hours of this already.
It could still be offered to realtors for this one, too.
It could.
Could be a CEU.
They'd have to pay for it this time, though, because I was doing that for free.
Yeah.
And they'd have to fill out the paperwork to try to get credit for it, because I'm not a certified instructor anymore.
Might even be the AIA too,
Yeah, so,
architects.
Okay.
CEUs for architects.
All right. So, at our next meeting, let's see if we can attach some finality, some definition to this whole idea. And if you're not comfortable with it, let us know. And in other words, whatever concerns you have, if you bring those to our next meeting so we can kick it around and see if, how far we can go with the preservation leadership class. Okay?
and I've got kind of a table that breaks down how Mobile did it, and what I will do is try to find it.
Okay.
And make some of the additions that Carol and I have talked about that would be good tweaks to it, and include that as part of your next agenda packet. So it'll give you something to look at, to start looking at a structure and think about things that can be added, or if you think something makes sense to come before another thing, we can start talking about, you know, what is the logical progression of information to build on in doing this.
Very good.
Okay. As we prepare to depart this afternoon, let me just say something about the awards program for 2017. That program was well attended. It was a success. We had much food. Everybody, I noticed, very few people left when the program was ended. There were people around for at least 45 minutes to an hour after the program. And for me, that's a clear indication that people were really enjoying themselves. So what we want to do for 2018 is something similar, if not something more than what we did for 2017 in terms of making our awards program a success. And it all depends on the cooperation that we got last year that we expect to receive this year as well. As we prepare to leave, is there anything any commission would like to say that you may have going on you'd like to bring to our attention?
I would just like to add, you know, as we move forward, I mean, the awards program does not have to maintain the same format. You know, we're talking about adding a graduation for a preservation leadership program as part of it. One of the things we have talked about, or had kind of toyed with early on, was whether or not we could get like the Arts Magnet involved with some of this. The historical societies looked at having some sort of historic art competition and maybe a partnership with them where you have art on display that is related to historic architecture becomes part of the program too. So we're kind of widening the circle of what all we touch in terms of history and historic preservation. So I know several of you were not here when we did this last year, but we're taking baby steps. But if there are things that you think would bring in more people, involve more people, please feel free to bring it up next year, not this year. I can't handle it this year. But where there may be some partnerships we want to look at to make it a bigger program. And ultimately make it something that people actually want to come to.
That's right.
Because it's going to be a heck of a party.
Anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to invite everybody, and I've got a few flyers here. The Renovators Happy Hour, our next one is on Thursday, March the 29th. And we'll actually be looking at one of the Four Sisters houses, if you're familiar with them. They were built by Dr. Baldwin on South Perry Street, just south of First Baptist Church there. We'll be looking at, it's actually in 420 South Perry Street. Mr. Giesi's sort of halfway through the restoration he's doing on the exterior, so you get to see one floor that has a really nice restoration job, and then another floor which is really very pure, and like Christy said, it's very readable. In other words, it's pretty fascinating to figure out what was there originally and what got added when, and so it's a really good read house. But so that'll be the 29th, Thursday afternoon, March 29th at 5:30.
5:30, okay, all right. Anyone else? Anyone else? Anyone else has something they'd like to bring to our attention? Okay? This meeting is hereby adjourned.